very pleased that we passed the budget vote. There are more votes, of course, to come through the budget process, but an important step for our country, protecting our communities, protecting our borders, protecting our way of life, building our country. I salute the 170 members of the House who supported it. I'm glad it came through, and we're going to continue to work.
What about those other votes?
That was Prime Minister Mark Carney today on his government clearing a crucial budget vote last night and avoiding another federal election. The budget narrowly passed last night. 170 MPs voted in favor. That's the entire Liberal caucus, plus Green Party leader Elizabeth May, while 168 opposition MPs voted against it. But the government would not have been able to pass its budget without 4 crucial abstentions from Conservative MP Matt Genereux, Conservative MP Shannon Stubbs, NDP MP Laurie Idlout, and NDP MP Gord Johns. Joining me now is Government House Leader Steven MacKinnon. Mr. MacKinnon, it's good to see you, sir. Thank you for joining us today.
Good to be with you.
The opposition parties were complaining that you weren't willing to negotiate on anything in this budget, and you got it through mostly because they were afraid of an election, it seems. Is that a signal of how you plan to approach the rest of this minority parliament?
Well, no. We have a minority, indeed. We believe we have a mandate. We certainly believe we have a mandate to present an economic plan, the one that was passed in the House of Commons yesterday. But as for future bills, initiatives, programs, motions, and the like, we of course view those all as one-offs, and we will continue to dialogue with members of opposition parties from all over the House of Commons to try and attract the support of a majority of parliamentarians for the things that we're doing.
There was a particular frustration from the Bloc leader, Mr. Blanchet. He had some strong criticisms of your government. I just want to play this clip and get your reaction on the other side. Have a listen to what the Bloc leader had to say.
They were not good partners for anybody. They exploited the momentary weaknesses of everybody, and this is not how policy should be done. So I believe it will come bite their ass.
You exploited weakness, sir, and it's going to bite your ass, is what he says. What's your response?
Well, I'm shocked that we're allowed to use that word on family television, David. Look, what can I say? The Bloc Québécois opposed the budget. They said, to be fair to them, all along that they would oppose the budget, and they ended up opposing the budget. To not attract the support of the Bloc Québécois is not something I, as a Quebec member of Parliament, feel particularly sheepish about. I'm rather satisfied that we've perhaps we've offended some people who, at the end of the day, want to break up the country.
But, you know, you do need to be able to have good relations with the other parties in a minority parliament. I mean, we've been going through this reality for a good 6 years now, since the 2019 election. I just wonder if sort of the hard line that was drawn here on not compromising on anything in the budget, was that to send a message that you're not going to move on day one? Because if you start giving concessions right away, you're going to be giving concessions every other day. Is that kind of the line the government was trying to take here?
Well, here's a dirty little secret, David. I think a lot of the opposition parties secretly like a lot of the stuff in the budget. Conservative-minded voters, you know what they like? They like an emphasis on growth. We've lowered taxes for every single income taxpayer in this country. We're building major projects and accelerating them at speeds that we haven't seen before. This is a budget that grows our economy. And a heck of a lot of conservative voters that I'm aware of are a little chuffed about that. For New Democrats, we've protected many of the things, dental care, the Canada Child Benefit, school nutrition programs. We've protected those things that they feel strongly about. And I think amidst all of the sturm and drang and the heat and light of the opposition, I suspect there's more than a few of them who are quite relieved that this budget has passed and find a lot they can agree with in it.
But are they relieved on a policy basis, or are they relieved on a political basis? Because I think it was the possibility of going back to an election, as you've been talking about, with voting on Boxing Day potentially.
Yep.
That seems to be the main motivation for certainly the Conservatives who abstained and may have had a backup plan, and for the NDP definitely in what they did.
Well, that's quite literally true, that we would have, maybe not Boxing Day, but Boxing Week, been trooping off to the polls throughout Canada. I don't think that is a prospect that anyone in the country, certainly no one that I spoke to, found enticing. And I suspect that's a message that was received loud and clear by all of the opposition. And I suspect that has a lot to do with their thinking. But as for whether they're relieved or not for political reasons, that's a question, of course, you'll have to ask them.
I wasn't certain what was going to happen until I saw Gord Johns not rise in his seat, one of the two NDP members who abstained. Mm-hmm. When did you know for sure you were going to win that vote? I know Liberals were reasonably confident, but not entirely certain. When did you know for sure?
Well, I don't think I ever knew for sure. I didn't know about Mr. Johns before he did what he did. I didn't know about any of the other parties and how they would manage it. I suspect I was among those who had a quiet confidence for the reason I just cited. I happen to know that there are a lot of members of Parliament in the opposition benches who find a lot they can like about that budget and find a lot they can like, frankly, in our Prime Minister. And the quiet confidence that he exudes, his ability to represent Canada around the world. Of course, they want their own political team to win, but I suspect if they were honest with you, in an honest moment, David, a number of NDP, even Bloc and Conservative members would tell you that Mark Carney is doing a pretty fine job in a challenging time.
Well, I mean, maybe, but they also think there's too many civil service cuts and overall program cuts if you're a New Democrat, and the deficit is too large if you're a Conservative. So, like, you know, it contains multitudes. Yep. Let's put it that way.
Well, and it's pretty hard to, and to go back to your earlier question, pretty hard to reconcile when you have a Bloc Québécois who wants us to spend $36 billion more with an already sizable deficit, and Mr. Poilievre, who proposes cuts and other proposals that he didn't even put in his own platform, and he expects the Liberal Party to implement. I like where the Liberal Party is, right in the middle of all of that noise, and presenting what we think is a growth budget for Canadians, and a pretty reasonable one at that.
Look, we know what Elizabeth May did. She made that clear yesterday in a scrum and in interviews, and so did the New Democrats. The Conservatives, though, Matt Jeneroux was a bit of a surprise, but not a large one, that he didn't vote at all. And Shannon Stubbs, of course, because of her medical leave, didn't vote. But Scott Reid and Andrew Scheer were not in their chairs when the voting started, which is unusual for the House Leader and caucus chair. They were behind a drape in the lobby trying to vote remotely, and only came out and voted in person, voted no, after it had become clear that the budget was going to pass. Do you think they tried to vote remotely and had technical problems, or do you think they waited for tactical reasons to avoid an election?
I think you'd have to ask them that question, David.
But have you ever seen an opposition House Leader not in their seat on a confidence vote when they are literally in the parliamentary precincts on a voting day?
Well, I've certainly seen opposition House Leaders attempt to vote remotely and, for whatever reason, not succeed. This is, as you know, a pretty frequent occurrence around here. But as for the events that transpired yesterday, you'll have to ask those who were involved in those.
Okay, one final question, Minister, because I know you've got to go. I mean, how much of a runway do you think this Parliament has? I know there will be confidence measures associated with the budget, but if they're not going to bring you down on the budget, they're probably not going to bring you down on the secondary things unless you have something extremely sneaky hidden in the Budget Implementation Act. How long do you think you have, a year, or do you think it's all resets in the spring after the leadership reviews and races with the NDP and the Conservatives?
I don't make those kind of predictions, David. What I do is I get up every day, put on my boots, and try and move our initiatives and our policies and our bills through a minority parliament. I will say we don't have a majority, but we believe we have a mandate. The Prime Minister has spoken very clearly through his leadership campaign, the election campaign, our platform, the throne speech. One thing Canadians can count on is that this Prime Minister will continue to be transparent with what he wants to achieve and what he wants the government to achieve, and that will put forward measures and bills that reflect those very priorities. I don't think anyone's been surprised by one iota by anything that this government has proposed and that this Prime Minister has brought forward. We've been transparent, we've been consistent, we believe we've earned that mandate, and we'll continue to dialogue and of course be open with the opposition and try and attract some of their support as we move forward.
Government House Leader Steven MacKinnon, until the next confidence vote. Thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you, David.
Well, the Liberal government is still standing in part because 4 MPs didn't vote last night, and 2 of those abstentions came from the NDP. So, how did the NDP decide who and how many of its MPs would not vote to let this budget pass? Joining me now is Don Davies. He, of course, is the interim leader of the NDP. Don Davies, it's good to finally speak with you after a week of trying to see what you're going to do in this vote. Look, you made it very clear last night you do not like this budget. You don't want to support this budget, but you don't want an election. So 5 against, 2 abstained. How did you decide who was going to vote against the budget and who was going to abstain?
Well, it was a caucus decision. You know, we've been working closely together over the last few weeks, and, you know, we made a very considered decision. You know, we examined the budget comprehensively. We talked to constituents and Canadians, and some things were very clear to us, David. One, that this budget really fails to meet the moment. So many Canadians are suffering and need immediate help, whether it's getting better jobs or lower prices or affordable housing, and this budget just didn't really address that. But at the same time, it was very clear that Canadians did not think an election was appropriate at this time. Right. So, you know, we reflected what we think is the overwhelming desire of the Canadian people, and frankly what's good for our country, and so it was an easy decision.
There was some reporting in the run-up to the budget, and we've been hearing rumors that you might have been one of the people who would abstain, along with Gord Johns. It turned out to be Mr. Johns and Laurie Idlout, the MP for Nunavut. Were you ever in the mix as one of the abstainers, as the whip and the interim leader, or did you need other people in your caucus to do that?
Well, as you can imagine, the situation was very fluid. You know, right up until a week ago, when we saw a Conservative cross the floor, and then we saw another Conservative resign and abstain, and then of course Ms. May said that she was going to be opposed to the budget, then she ended up being for it. And in a razor-thin parliament like this, where you're a couple votes away from the government passing or failing, it was really a game-time decision right up until the very end. I thought it was important as leader of the party to express that we did oppose this budget. We think it's a very conservative budget. It fails to meet the moment. It's bad for the climate. It doesn't invest in healthcare. It fails to, I think, provide immediate relief to the many Canadians who need it right now. So I felt it was important as leader to express that opposition. And so we did it in the maximum way possible while not bringing down the government, which is what I think Canadians wanted.
And so did your calculation change after Elizabeth May made her intentions clear? Because it does change the math to the point that you needed 2 abstentions as opposed to, say, 4 abstentions or however many it would be. Was it her decision that helped you finalize how that vote was going to go last night?
Well, it made a difference. I mean, because I think it was, she was a no vote right up until the afternoon of the vote. So when she decided to vote yes, then that changed the calculus a little bit. So, you know, we were paying close attention and we voted accordingly.
Okay, she was in negotiations with the government. You were in negotiations. Everyone was in negotiations with the government. All Elizabeth May got for her vote was a verbal commitment to existing Liberal commitments from the Prime Minister, and that gave her the cover she felt she needed to vote the way she did. You negotiated with them and didn't seem to get anything. Am I understanding this correctly? What was it you were asking for that they just weren't willing to move on?
Well, we've said from the beginning that we were not going to negotiate in public, and I don't know if I'd even call it negotiations. We were in discussions with the government for the last several weeks, and we put forth a number of things that would be required to secure NDP support for this budget. And we worked in good faith, and we had discussions right up until the day of the budget. But at the end, the Liberals just were not able to provide enough there for the New Democrats to give our support. You know, I would point out that I think this budget is particularly bad for the environment and climate. You know, it hints at getting rid of the emissions caps in the oil and gas industry. It eliminates the planting of 1 billion trees. It even reverses the steps on greenwashing claims. So I'll leave it to Ms. May to explain how she can justify her vote. But in our view, this budget being bad for the climate was one of the reasons why we couldn't support it.
Well, you know, we spoke with Dave Sawyer from the Climate Institute, who says that the plan in the budget can still work if they deliver on the industrial carbon tax promises that are in there, that a multi-decade, you know, beefed up industrial pricing policy can still work. It can replace the need for an emissions cap and the scrapped consumer carbon tax. I mean, do you accept that that's possible? Because that's going to be a tough sell in certain parts of the country. But do you see a path there if they can deliver on the industrial pricing?
Well, the industrial pricing is a factor, but I don't think anybody can fairly describe this budget as being a good one for the climate.
Okay, but you said in your conversations that the government wouldn't give enough for the NDP. Would they not give enough, or would they not give anything? Because some of the feedback we're hearing from various conversations with people is that they were just not willing to negotiate on this budget, and it sends a pretty clear signal, it seems, of just how Prime Minister Carney and his team plan to approach this minority parliament. So help me understand. I know you don't want to get into the granular details, but was it just not enough movement or practically no movement at all?
I would say there wasn't enough movement. We had good faith negotiations, and I think we did make significant progress on a lot of issues, but just not enough to get us to a yes. And when you're starting from the point of this budget, which is, it slashes 40,000 jobs at a time when we have a jobs crisis. It slashes services that we think Canadians need at a time when they're really suffering. As I said earlier, it fails to invest or strengthen our healthcare system, not only something that I think is important for the health of Canadians,
right,
but something that's good from a sovereignty point of view when we're facing threats from south of the border. These Canadian institutions are things that I think strengthen us as a nation. And I think our healthcare system may be the flagship of that. It didn't do anything for EI. We're expecting there to be significant job losses in the months and year ahead. We wanted to make sure our workers are protected. There was really nothing for forestry workers. It just was a budget that I think could have been written by any progressive conservative prime minister in this country, and so it would have taken significant movement on their part to get us to a position. But we tried to get there, we just didn't.
Okay, so every opposition party is standing up and saying this budget is absolutely terrible and should be defeated, but then they didn't vote as a bloc to do it, even though the numbers were there. So that sends a message to the prime minister and his team that they've got some runway here, because if you're not going to bring them down on the budget, we know Ways and Means is going to go ahead and it's not like between now and Christmas the government is going to fall on related confidence matters. So what should we expect from the New Democrats going forward? I know you said last night, I think it was, that it's going to be kind of case by case, but there's also a calendar towards the end of March when your permanent replacement as leader will be picked. I mean, are we looking at not until spring and summer before you're ready to have an election? Does your party process need to be completed if it's just the standard parliamentary business between now and then?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think everything you said is true. We do have to evaluate every measure that comes forward on its own basis. Like when the Budget Implementation Act comes forward, we don't know what's in it yet. So it's really hard to say in advance that you're going to support it or not.
Fair.
Having said that, we've set the context that we don't think Canadians want or need an election right now. Our country is facing a dual crisis. We have internal economic issues, and we've got these problems south of the border. I don't think that it's good for our country right now to be thrust into an election at Christmas. So, that's heavy on our mind as well. Mm-hmm. But we can't speculate or give any assurance until we see what's happening. We'll evaluate everything as it comes. The springtime, of course, will be an important time as well. There'll be a spring economic update. As you know, the Liberal government have reversed the normal budgetary cycle.
Yep.
So we're
going to have the threat of a Christmas election with every fall budget from now on. You realize that, don't you, with this change?
It's not lost on me.
Yeah, that's going to be a thing we're all going to have to live with. But look, you're getting a lot of grief for propping up the Liberals, which I know stings a bit after sort of not getting the credit for the Supply and Confidence Agreement achievement and sort of bearing that in the last election. By the time it had gotten to the NDP, Liz May had already voted yes, and Matt Jenneru and Shannon Stubbs had abstained. So it was going to be a tie vote that the Speaker would pass the budget no matter what. But what do you say to that criticism? Because I know your caucus and your party is sensitive to this, right? Mm-hmm. That this is Mark Carney is not Justin Trudeau. It's a different type of conversation and a different type of issue set. But how do you push back to the argument that you're just propping them up all over again?
Well, it's just mathematically, politically, and factually false. We voted no to a Liberal budget last night. 5 of us voted no and 2 abstained. There was not a single yes vote, so we didn't prop anybody up. Number 2, mathematically, even if all 7 of us had voted no, as you said, David, it gets to a tie. The Speaker breaks the tie, and the government survives. So our votes were not material. Second or third, I guess I would say, the Conservatives had 2 abstentions. We had 2 abstentions. Did Pierre Poilievre prop up the government? And Miss May voted yes. Did she prop up the government? The bottom line for us was we didn't prop anybody up. We voted in a way that we said we're opposed to this budget. We expressed that opposition, but we also channeled what I think is the vast majority of Canadians' desire, which is they didn't think it's appropriate to have an election. And I think the NDP did the responsible thing. We owned it. We've been honest with Canadians, and I think we're channeling what Canadians want us to do, which is work on the issues they sent us here to tackle.
Look, everybody except the Bloc Québécois took steps to avoid an election yesterday because the Bloc voted 100% against. But just as a last question, Mr. Davies, you didn't pull back the curtain really until Gord-Johns didn't stand up during the roll call vote in the House. And Laurie Idlout, her vote was initially a no, but then it moved to an abstention in the electronic voting. The Conservative, you pulled back the curtain late. The Conservatives were behind the curtain with their House Leader and their caucus chair trying to vote remotely, even though they were right there behind their benches. Did you know they were holding people back? Do you think that's what that was? They were holding Andrew Scheer and Scott Reid back just in case the vote didn't go the way they wanted to avoid an unnecessary election?
There's no doubt that's what they did. I mean, I don't think this is a time to play political games, especially risking something as important as a federal government and a federal election. But when they held back two people, and they waited to see what the result would be and then ran into the chamber at the last minute and changed their votes, I think it's pretty obvious what the Conservatives were doing. So they clearly would have saved this government if the votes hadn't gone the way that it had in advance. And the New Democrats have been very clear and honest with the Canadian people, and I think that's the better way to go. I'll leave it to the Conservatives to explain their actions.
Have you ever seen a House Leader, an opposition House Leader who was in Ottawa in the Parliament, not in their seat on a confidence vote on a matter like the budget?
Well, I've been here 17 years, David, and I haven't seen it.
Okay. Don Davies, interim leader of the NDP. Thanks so much for your time today, sir.
Thank you, David.
Okay, so the Liberal government has survived that confidence vote last night as the federal budget narrowly passed after a Green Party leader, Elizabeth May, voted to support it, and two Conservatives and two New Democrats decided to abstain. The NDP says while they don't support the budget, they also don't want an election.
The consequences of defeating this budget would not be to improve it or to help Canadians. It would be to plunge the country into an election only months after the last one, and while we still face an existential threat from the Trump administration.
Okay, the other two abstentions were two Conservative MPs, Shannon Stubbs, who was on medical leave to recover from surgery, and Matt Genereux, who was MIA after announcing his plans to resign from politics at some point in this spring. And it almost looked like there would be two more Conservative abstentions because during the vote, two figures could be seen standing behind the curtains inside the House of Commons. Once it was clear the budget would pass, though, two other Conservatives, two Conservative MPs, we don't know if it was the people behind the drapes, and we got an update on that, they rushed to their seats and asked to record their vote.
The Honourable official opposition House Leader has a point.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I had technical difficulty. I would like to vote no.
Mr. Reid, you can just recognize
Mr. Reid, yes.
Mr. Speaker, I was unable to use my app. I would like to vote no.
Anyone else?
Okay, so Andrew Scheer is the Conservative House Leader. Scott Reid is a Conservative caucus chair. There was a lot of claims that they were the people in the background there waiting to see what the vote would be before coming out to vote and register a no vote. Andrew Scheer's office tells CBC News that was not him. He was apparently at a committee, but that committee ended at 6, but then he had to rush in for the vote at 6:45. So that's the lay of the land as we bring in the power panel. Emily Nicolas is a columnist for Le Devoir. Supriya Dwivedi was an advisor to former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Peter MacKay is a former Conservative cabinet minister, and here with me in the studio is Jordan Leichnitz, who is a former NDP strategist. Okay, good to see you all. Supriya, I want to start with you. I mean, we heard from all the opposition parties that essentially there were conversations with the government, but no negotiations with the government on the substance and content of the budget. And it was like, this is my plan, vote for it, and that they got it through. What does that tell us about what we can expect the Carney government's approach to be to this parliament, do you think?
I think they're governing as though they have a majority, even though the numbers aren't there. It's a very strong majority. It's a very strong minority, but of course it's not that majority threshold. I have a column that went up on the Star website today. It's in print tomorrow. And the general thrust of it is, Mr. Carney, the economist, is, a genius. I don't think anybody questions his credentials. But as a politician, he's a bit of a rookie. And you see that with the uncompromising nature. And at the end of the day, the reason why we're not plunged into a Christmas time election that would tilt the scales in favor of the war on Christmas is because you did have those abstentions from the NDP, right? And I think, moving forward, the Liberals, they should take this as a win. It was a clear win for the Prime Minister and his agenda. But, you kind of want to keep in mind that you still don't have the numbers for a majority. And sometimes hubris is enough to piss off the opposition to not want to play ball. So I would respectfully advise them to tread with a little bit of caution.
Peter MacKay, I wonder how you see it. I know a lot of people are beating up on the NDP for propping up the government, but if you look at how it went down, Elizabeth May voted yes and 2 Conservatives abstained, and that all happened before we got to the New Democrats, so you knew then the budget was safe, right? But what do you make of the uncompromising nature of the talks by the Liberals?
Well, historically, David, you'll know the last time we had a prime minister and a government take that sort of uncompromising, unwielding position, they lost. And that was the government of Joe Clark in 1979. And the rest is history, as the saying goes. He had a short-lived government, minority government, that lost to a returning then Pierre Trudeau and never got back, never was able to regain his footing. So it is a extremely risky, high-stakes move to say to the opposition, well, take it in the teeth. Here it is, vote for it or don't, and we're prepared to go to the polls. They would, of course, entirely blame the opposition if that happened, and that's posturing, that's the game, as the saying goes. So it is, it's hard to say whether this attitude will prevail. It's a fine line between, confidence and arrogance. I think, we will see in the future if this sort of unbending attitude prevails. I suspect it won't. I think that you will see an effort on the part of House leaders, and having sat at many of those meetings, there is usually a lot of formal and informal horse trading, if you will, to say, well, is there something we could do to bring you on board? That appears to have been the case with Elizabeth May, where, there was a commitment to the Paris Climate Change Accord. That was enough to get her vote. That was enough for her to go back to her constituency and her constituents and say, well, I got the Prime Minister to commit. The last time I saw anything similar to this was in 2005, 2006 in a Paul Martin government, where it worked for a while and they pulled some people across the floor, as we've seen happen in this parliament, and then it didn't. And so that will have to be a calculus each and every time there's a confidence vote in the House. Is there a backstory we don't know? Is there compromise that happened? Or are we going to go to this sort of shotgun standoff, pistols at dawn, as we saw in the drama this week?
Right. Well, look, it got the budget through. The Bloc Québécois, who all voted against it, the leader was a bit upset about it today. They all voted against the budget, but Mr. Blanchet, François Blanchet, was asked whether the party would ever collaborate with the Liberals on legislation, and have a listen to this answer.
They were not good partners for anybody. They exploited the momentary weaknesses of everybody, and this is not how policy should be done. So I believe it will come bite their ass.
So there you go, Mr. Blanchet, bottom lining it for us in English. I mean, you do need a good relation with the other parties in the minority parliament. It sounds like they didn't win any friends and favors in the budget vote process.
Yeah, none at all. I think all the parties feel a little bit burned in one way or another from this experience. And it's interesting to consider that when you actually look and all parties, for their own reasons, weren't really seeking an election, perhaps except the Liberals. And so that being the case, there was really no need for that vote to actually be that close or that stressful. There was ample room for the government to have those conversations and to arrange the passage of the budget well in advance. But because they were very unyielding in their approach, and I think also because they didn't have good relationships with the other parties at the House level, that wasn't the case. And it was discussions right up until the last minute. And and I believe them when they said that they weren't sure where the votes were going to come from.
Emily, what's your thoughts on this one? I mean, I don't know if the backroom stuff is particularly relevant to most Canadians' lives. I assume it isn't. It's more the outcome. Budget passed, no election.
Well, in terms of the backroom stuff, although we doubt that we will even see, I remember a couple of conversations over the weeks on this show, David, where we were like, well, but with new technologies, will people find a way to actually, be missing in action? And there is that Curtin story and people rushing from communities that ended the 45 minutes before. And so it seems that people keep on being creative. And so we might see some of that creativity in the future as well. If the votes get passed in a way that is this narrow again. That being said, I think beyond the fact that Mark Carney is being inflexible right now, there's also the fact that the NDP had basically no choice in the sense that it would have been terrible for them to go into an election right now. And it would be also terrible for them to be put in a position where they negotiate with the Liberal government and actually vote for a budget that they negotiated again, because this kind of dance is also what burned them electorally at the end of the day, and they need to, take a break from being the dancing partners of the Liberals. And so it was what it was in a way. The Green Party vote is the one that is odd to reconcile. Elizabeth May could have chose to just abstain as well. And so that's, I think, for the one that is hard to explain last minute. But for everybody else, I think it would have been bad for the NDP to actually be convinced by Mark Carney. And the Bloc Québécois also would not necessarily have, with the list of demands that they had, it would have been a completely different budget by the time that they got their ask. And so it would have been a bit difficult as well to negotiate with them.
Yeah, it would have been a $100 billion plus deficit if you look at the old age transfers and things like that they wanted. And anyway, they were not going to go there. that is for sure. But Supriya, I go back to your point. You said politically there's some rookiness to the Prime Minister's game. Is that the case, or did he recognize the weakness of the other three parties and just exploit that to get the plan through? Because clearly the overarching concern was not the 40,000 jobs that are going to be cut from the public service or the massive deficit, which apparently is the cause of everybody's problems in life. It was, we don't want an election right now, so the Prime Minister is going to get his budget through.
Yeah, and I mean, look, I think you can certainly spin it the other way to say this shows like a masterful gambit at the end of the day. But if that was the case, then they would have done the performative conversations in lieu of those consultations with the opposition parties earlier than 2 weeks prior to the budget being tabled, right? Like, we know that on October 21st is when Don Davies called out the Liberals for not having met with the NDP yet. And it was only that week that then the Prime Minister decided to sit down with all of the opposition parties. And you compare that to, the last government, even before the Supply and Confidence Agreement that the Trudeau Liberals would have had with the then Jagmeet Singh-led NDP, the government would consult weeks and weeks in advance of the budget being tabled to ensure that there are certain measures that, the NDP could support. Did it with the Bloc. Like, that's just the name of the game in a minority parliament. And so from my vantage point, it just seems as though there is a sense of, well, we have a very strong minority, almost at majority territory. So let's just fake it till we make it. And yeah, thus far it's working for them.
Right. So Peter MacKay, I wonder, look, two Conservatives abstained. Matt Genereux, who has not voted in 3 confidence votes now since the news broke that he was resigning as a member of Parliament at a future date, and Shannon Stubbs, who has had a medical procedure that has been explained in some detail, and I do have absolutely no doubt that she's being honest there. But there was this dramatic moment last night where Andrew Scheer, the House Leader, and Scott Reid, the caucus chair, came rushing in at the end of the voting to say, we tried to vote electronically, but we had technical failures, so we'd like our vote to be recorded. And they did this after it was known the budget would pass. Now, there are those pictures of people being in the lobby behind the drapes, which Andrew Scheer's office says was not them, but the House Leader voting electronically when they're in the building on a vote like that, and the caucus chair voting electronically when he's in the building on a vote like that, that seems unusual. Do you think, what should people make of this? Were they just holding them back as a strategic reserve in case the budget accidentally fell? How do you view it?
Yeah, David, that's a possible explanation. Of course, voting, electronic voting, is a relatively new capability. And so that wasn't permissible. It wasn't available when I was there. So it wasn't unusual to have the House leader who and the whip who are in charge of ensuring that all the members are there and in their seats when the vote is called. And I've seen it happen. We've all seen it where people just don't get there on time and they're not able to get to their seat, or they're in the aisle on their way to the seat when the clock hits the hour. So there's any number of explanations that could explain it. I don't know. I mean, I don't think people really care. As you said yourself a moment ago, the vote passed. They had the requisite votes. The drama was there. A lot of it is performative and finger pointing. I mean, I've seen votes where the speaker had to break the tie. Those were very dramatic moments. You've seen times where people didn't know until the actual vote was called whether anybody was going to get up or down. So
right.
It's a lot of drama. At the end of the day, Canadians really don't care too much about this sort of insider drama. They simply want to know, okay, how is this going to impact our bottom line, our company, our job, my child's education, our fixed income? That's really what matters. And I think we spend an awful lot of time getting pulled into the drama and the dark, murky waters of politics, as opposed to the application of the budget itself.
No, look, and I appreciate that. And we have done a lot of interviews on the budget, but I just, Jordan, immediately after the vote, there was social media attacks on the Greens and the NDP for letting the budget pass. When, yes, Liz May's vote, but then the two Conservative abstentions passed this budget before the NDP ever stood. And I just wonder if it seemed in real time, and a lot of people on the government side and the NDP side of the House think this is what the Conservatives were prepared to do because they don't want an election right now. I mean, how do you view what all went down?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's very clear that the Conservatives were in this equation very enthusiastic about preventing an election. And I think it's maybe not entirely surprising when you consider that we saw the polling out today that shows that Mr. Poilievre's approval ratings continue to dip after the election. So there's not a desire on the part of many who are in the party right now, not so much in the base. I think there are a lot of people in the Conservative base who would love an election right now, but those who are in the party, who are around the leader, don't really want to go to the polls right now. A moment of weakness after losing members to floor crossing and to resignation is not ideal. And look, I think there's, and probably Mr. Scheer could be up for an Oscar for some of the, potentially some of the acting that was engaged in there. It would be very unusual for a House leader to be late or to be missing a confidence vote, particularly the first confidence vote of a new sitting government. So I think that is important context for this.
Yeah, Emily, it's interesting. And Matt Genereux, who announced that he is resigning, but has not resigned, has now missed 3 confidence votes and has not been in Parliament. What do we make of this? Because I'm not trying to beat up on Mr. Genereux, who made a very personal point about his family and things in his resignation letter, but you still have the job. How tenable is this sort of dynamic where he's, even with the remote voting option, on confidence votes, the account is silent?
At some point, you were elected by constituents to do a job. And with new technologies that are now available, you need to be doing that job. And so he needs to show up eventually and do what he needs to do until he's out of office. And so especially for a confidence vote like this, I think some people in his riding have questions to ask. That being said, I also think that it might not be something that, for example, the Conservatives press too much on right now. Perhaps if the Conservative Party did not want an election, a person missing in action is actually not the worst thing in the world. Maybe it helped Andrew Scheer run back to his seat. We don't know. And so that is so that's not necessarily something that I expect drama at the House of Commons on, because frankly it probably was for the best for everybody else involved.
So Priya, it occurred to me when I was speaking with Don Davies earlier that the new fiscal timeline that Mark Carney wants to implement means we're going to have November budgets every year and the threat of a Christmas election every year. So we all have that to look forward to. It's not going to be a Boxing Day election this year. There is a leadership review for Mr. Poilievre at the end of January and the NDP leadership race conclusion at the end of March. Is that the horizon that's probably clear for this parliament, do you think? I mean, where do you think we get to the actual real tangible threat of this whole thing falling down and going back to the polls?
Oh, geez, David, what a depresso question. I mean, look,
Minority parliaments only last so long.
No, you're right. You're right. It's a fair question. Don't get me wrong. Look, if I had a crystal ball, then I'd be, more of a betting person. But I think realistically, I think your timeline's probably right. I don't think the NDP is going to want to head into an election without having a permanent leader in place. And then, of course, there's also the question, if the leader is somebody who doesn't have a current seat, right, in the House, then it's like, well, do they want to wait for a by-election until they can get a seat, and then, yada, yada. So, I think in a minority parliament, it's always a possibility that whenever there's a vote, you can have a kind of a comedy of errors situation where even if they weren't planning on an election, you can kind of stumble into one. Hopefully that doesn't happen. And if we are going into an election, it's because there is some sort of, planning involved, and it's was the objective was to go into one.